and welcome to another That Word Chat. Good to see you all here today. I'm excited. I always say that every single time I say I'm excited, it's true. Paula Froke is our guest today. Paula is editor of the Associated Press Stylebook, which I've been a fan of for these 30 some, nearly 40 years since I think I got my first style book. She's been editor of the style book for the past few years, so we're going to talk all about that, and we're going to get to know her a little bit better. She is also manager of AP's Nerve Center, which is sounds very cool title to have on a business card, I guess. So welcome, Paula.
Thank you. Great to be here. And I love that introductory music. I certainly jazzes us all up for a little bit of style discussion.
It really is the highlight of the show, and we repeat it at the end just to, just because it's so much fun. So what is the Nerve Center?
The Nerve Center is kind of the central coordinating desk at our headquarters. And to be clear, I'm not the manager, I'm one of the managers. So there are many other co-managers, and we coordinate the work of our journalists across the globe, of our social media, of our standards. Style is part of that. It's a kind of the central gathering, management and supervision spot for the AP.
Okay, so what was it before it was the Nerve Center? What was the equivalent?
For a while, when I joined the AP, it was called the General Desk. That's
yeah, okay,
a good term. But interestingly, cool. Very interestingly, and going through some archives, and I can't remember the year, I think it was around 1948 or so, I found an old photo of a bunch of old white guys manning, literally, what was then called the AP Nerve Center back in many decades ago. And then 10 or 15 years ago, when the General Desk was re-envisioned to become the Nerve Center, I am fairly certain at the time the people who did that thought it was a brand new term. So everything that's old is new again, as always.
Yeah, okay, well, it's a good title. So we wanted to, so we used a photo that you sent us. We didn't just pick this up, the web of you and on election night, and it was just so emblematic of what election night is at a news operation, I think. So what's happening here?
Well, first off, you might not know that it's a tradition in newsrooms, probably globally, to have pizza on election night. So just because we were all working in our homes, most of us were, there was no reason for me not to have a pizza. So that was my husband's duty, that and serving as my photographer. But on this particular night, my duties involved, I just noticed that cat food in the back. Every time I look at this photo, I see new things.
Well, I'm noticing the vodka in the
well, I will get to that. I do have a disclaimer there. Yes. No, but I was doing customer communications, kind of keeping some of the key customers up on what we were expecting to be coming up. That cabinet, yes, there's vodka in the bottom, but if you see right above it, there are coffee mugs, and I had it open to get out a coffee mug to keep myself going throughout the night. It's possible I had some of the vodka several hours later, but not at that point.
Okay, so I would think the coffee mugs are just to disguise what the liquid is inside. Yeah, but I love you. You definitely have cats. You got that big bag of cat food back there. Yeah, it's a great scene. So this is so I was saying, I posted something on Facebook about how I first became got to know AP as obviously as a newspaper person. Well, that's not true. I knew AP Stylebook. I knew AP as an organization before I became a journalist and got into newspapers myself. But my main interaction was calling and saying, "Can you please resend this story off the budget? Can you resend that story off the budget?" And it also included nights, and you probably remember some of this, where I started out in Marquette in Michigan on Lake Superior, and in the winter, of course, we'd have such tremendous snowfall. The giant satellite dish on the roof would fill up with snow, and we'd have to take a broom and go off and brush it off, so we could then start getting the feedback from AP. And this also continued in Grand Rapids. There was that happen occasionally in Grand Rapids where we just lose the satellite feed. So I imagine that's not what you're dealing with customers there exactly?
Not today, but indeed back in the day when I was in Michigan for 10 years, and I think we overlapped and might have even talked on the phone back then. But we AP always has been kind of we have many specialists and many subject matter experts in journalism, but a lot of us also have been jack of all trades, and we're multitasking long before multitasking became a thing. So when I was on what we call on the desk in before Michigan, by the time I got to Michigan, I was news editor, so I had somewhat more exalted duties. But I would sit there helping manage the various catastrophes that happened. Yeah, when we got a heavy snow and all the customer satellite dishes filled up.
Yeah. And you came from Minnesota, right? Is that true?
Well, I mean, my first AP job was in Minnesota.
Okay, yeah, that's what I meant. So you went from Minnesota to Michigan to New York. Oh, and you actually said you started as a Dow Jones intern, right on the AP National desk.
We have a number of Dow Jones alumni in the AP, and in fact, 2 others besides myself are on the Stylebook team who got their training through Dow Jones. So,
oh, cool.
Evidence of the great job they do. We think it's a great job.
Well, I want to talk about the Stylebook team, because we want to find out, how it all comes together, how it gets made. We have one other photo. Oh, there it is. Oh, slideshow style. So this is the badass Paula photo. What's going on here?
I actually think I look very calm in that.
Well, you do, yeah, but you look, I mean, in a badass kind of way. It's like you're obviously in the competition here. You're looking calm. You're like I would be very intimidated if I were competing against you, of looking over at you looking calm like that.
Okay, good. Yeah. That was the intent.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a whole different sort of photo than the pizza on election night thing. But that, in my spare time, when I'm not doing Stylebook and AP related things, I train and I compete in track cycling, which is on a single gear, fixed gear, no brakes bike on a velodrome. You might have seen it in the Olympics. I don't do it at that level, obviously. But we do, I'm fortunate enough to have a track, a velodrome, about an hour away from me. And this past summer, Masters Nationals, Masters meaning for old people, although old people are defined as 35 and plus, Masters Nationals at my local track. And it's divided into age categories. But I was able to snare this little piece of hardware, a gold medal in the match sprints.
Let me stop sharing. And oh yeah,
there you go. That was a gold, and I got several silvers, which I wish were gold, in my rather advanced age category. So it's a nice outlet, and I do in fact at times think work and style matters while circling around the track. So it's a good way to combine things. Interestingly, yesterday when one of the promo tweets went out, a guy that I had met this summer at Masters Nationals and became a Facebook friend with, got in touch and said, I had no idea you work for the AP. I still have my AP Stylebook subscription and follow the Twitter account because I was an editor. I was a newspaper editor back in the day, and now I'm in PR marketing. So both worlds intersecting there. Sure.
And actually, I was going to ask you about that, because I think there's a great story. I was with Colleen in New Orleans, at a bar after midnight, as one does in New Orleans. And there was a stag party, a guy about to get married, and all his friends. And they learned that Colleen was the product manager for the AP Stylebook. And Colleen Newvine is with us in the audience. Hi, Colleen. And so, I mean, the thing you don't expect, I mean, in New Orleans after midnight, there's no jazz playing at the moment. So there's this really, involved discussion about AP style and what should be in the book and what isn't in the book. So I wonder, have you had that experience? Not necessarily at a bar in New Orleans, but
I probably have had it at a bar in New Orleans or in other places. I do have random people that I meet largely through cycling, because that's the bulk of how I spend my time, who, if they discover what I do, want to offer usually some very, very small minor suggestion that I can, it might be a good one, and I'll put it on our list, but our list is so long for all of the other suggestions that we get that there can be a great deal of competition for what we actually have time to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, tell me, what's the single most, I'm suspecting it has to do with comments, but what's the single most common request people make of the AP style book?
Request or question?
Well, let's do both.
I think probably the single biggest request is that we change our guidance on the Oxford comma. And very often that is because people misunderstand our guidance on the Oxford comma. Other times it's not, but many people would like us to simply adopt the all Oxford comma all the time approach, as opposed to the Oxford comma 90% of the time approach, which in fact is what we do. That is just widely misunderstood.
Yeah. Do you think 90%? Because I think your predecessors in that role would probably have put it much lower than 90%.
For the, I mean, our guidance is really very simple. In simple lists, we say don't use the Oxford comma, and simple lists are very simple. But that is then followed in the book by what, 3 or 4 or 5 exceptions, which cover the bulk of writing, including the ham and cheese, you know, the and conjunction. So really, in reality, we do use it most of the time, and we certainly recommend it whenever it's needed for clarity. We don't think it's necessary to add a second comma in the flag is red, white, and blue. But simple lists in our mind are simple, and we think that it's not that hard. With all of the other complicated things that people have to figure out in their life, we really think that recognizing a simple list is pretty easy.
Yeah, nobody's going to be too confused about that. Yes. So that was the obvious answer. What's the what else do you get a lot of?
Requests for change. You know, I don't know that we get a lot of consistent requests on a particular topic to change. We get a big variety of requests to make changes. I think some of the most common questions involve 2 areas: hyphens and numerals versus words. A couple of years ago, I made an effort to clarify what had been our long-standing guidance on hyphens and covered off, and especially in Ask the Editor, our online forum, by adding some more words to the guidance that we already had, giving some more examples. People interpreted that to mean that we were somehow taking all hyphens away, no hyphens anymore anywhere. Mark, I think you were partly to blame for that, and I'll get to that in a moment. But what was fascinating about that was, number one, by far the bulk of people who were complaining about it clearly hadn't read the entry, hadn't read the guidance. They read a tweet, or they read a headline, or they read, you know, a lead of someone else's story about it. But so also just how passionate people were about hyphens, which is both heartening. It's very heartening, and it's also somewhat scary sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it's you do get the sort of this good-natured passion about things like hyphens and Oxford commas, and then sometimes you have to stop and say, well, are you really this agitated about this, or is it? So yes. So I don't know what you're talking about, me having to do with the hyphen.
Well, it's just I think coincidentally with that ended up in fact deleting a couple of hyphens in a couple of cases, and people took that to be indicative of a groundswell of taking away all hyphens. But 2 of those cases were some dude named Mark Allen submitted a suggestion.
Sorry, go on. I was gonna say another dude named Henry Furman, who's also.
And there was 2 dudes. So we'll get to that dude too. So the dude named Mark Allen suggested that, you know, some rules that we've had in the book have been there since the beginning of time, and one of them was to hyphenate passerby or passersby. And we don't necessarily, we're occupied with many things, and some good changes escape us until somebody points it out. And Mark pointed out that common usage and all the dictionaries, basically everyone except the AP, left out the hyphen and passerby. So we took a look at that, and we said, yeah, he's right. You know, there's really no good reason for this. And so we promptly deleted the hyphen and passerby. The same with the hyphen and double E combinations, like preeminent and preemptive. Again, our guidance in general is to hyphenate if the 2 vowels follow each other, in the same vowel follows each other. which I think is good guidance, actually, but for whatever
Yeah.
reason, common usage in all of the dictionaries, as Mark again pointed out, and Google Trends everywhere else, nobody except AP hyphenated those double E combinations. So again, there was no reason for us to, just stand our ground based on something that was decided many years ago that no one else was doing. So we took out that hyphen.
Right. And then, but the Henry Furman change, which I call it the Henry Furman change, was more was not an old style that was sort of passe. It was in some ways I don't know how common it was to have hyphenated blank American, Japanese American, Asian American, African American. Those hyphens that wasn't sort of a trending thing. And I wonder, the question I'm trying to get at here is, are you sometimes feeling like you're getting ahead of the usage when it comes to some conscious language, I would call it, type issues, where you feel that there's a basis to change this, and maybe AP isn't following, but AP is sort of leading a little bit?
I think this is an odd thing to say about the AP, but in general, the AP doesn't like to lead in situations such as this. We like to lead in breaking news. We like to lead in fast coverage, but our standard and tradition over time has been to not jump the gun and to wait a period of time to see how usage evolves. And very, very often wait literally years of watching usage evolve before making any change. That has changed certainly during the internet age, when there are so many more sources of information and opinions and arguments, very good arguments on all sides of an equation out there in the land for everyone to see. And I think the language and a lot of usage is evolving much more rapidly than it was even 10 years ago. So there is, I think, more pressure for us to keep up with the changes, but at the same time, not be too fast and not do anything too dramatic. The last thing we want to do is just catch on with the latest trend, or do it just because somebody else is doing it. And certainly there's many examples of our holding back, and there will be again this year, I'm sure. But other things, and then some decisions we've had to make on the fly much more quickly than we would have otherwise. For instance, with the coronavirus and the pandemic, we literally were deciding, within 2 hours, kind of what our style on COVID-19 would be.
Right.
That's the kind of thing that in the past would have been deliberated for weeks. I mean,
Yeah.
but we didn't have that luxury. We needed to come up with a style. So.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting to see how much variation, not to get into the weeds too much, but the Washington Post is just, COVID's a word. It's
Right.
I don't think lowercase it, but they don't.
Lowercase,
It's not
the
all
post lowercase
caps.
is it. Yeah, the lowercase.
Yeah.
Post
whole
is all
thing.
lowercase. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like the radical difference. And the AP style is still all caps after the WHO guidance that it should
Right.
be, and it's an acronym for coronavirus. Coronavirus.
Something you don't want to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, but I mean, that was I think that's one thing that I always tell people. One thing that I feel is a strength of AP Stylebook is that it does change, and it can change on the fly. You don't have to wait for publication. Your focus is not on selling the books. Sorry, Colleen, but it's on keeping up with giving the members what they need in terms of language guidance, right? Yeah. I guess it was, I don't know if there was a question or not, but so what is the process? If we could back up a little bit and talk about how stuff gets into the book. I mean, you're the editor in charge of the AP Stylebook, but you have other people who are contributing, and I imagine some people who contribute in a less formal way because they have an interest. And like me, I send you a note and say, hey, what about this? So what is the process?
Okay, well, let me know what I forget as I start trying to describe. There, I mean, there's buckets. There's the buckets of how we get ideas, which I'll cover, and then there's the buckets of how we decide. So how about if I start with how we get the ideas, which come from a variety of sources. We on the Stylebook team obviously watch the news and come up with our own ideas. We get suggestions from the public suggestions link on Stylebook Online. We get emails directly from individuals or organizations. We get a lot of ideas from Twitter. People who are, raising questions about some of our existing style guidance that we say, yeah, let's talk about that again. Or saying, hey, how come this AP Stylebook doesn't cover this? And we say, yeah, maybe we should. And we'll put that on the list to consider. We also have, Stylebook Online has what's called an Ask the Editor feature where users can ask questions of the editor, me. And a lot of that we just answer, and it's a one-off situation, and it just stands on its own in Ask the Editor. But there are also are times if we get enough questions, or even one question that's a really good one, that'll cause me to say, yeah, we should put that in the main book, and make that a prominent part. So all of that goes into my internal documents that I then parcel out throughout the year based on priority. Some things we decide we need to think about right away. Some things we can decide fairly quickly. Other things take, we start talking about it right away, but then that discussion lasts for weeks. Other things I think we'll get to right away. And then I literally have right now priority this week, priority 1, priority 2, 3, and 4. And at one point, everything on priority 4 at one point I thought would be a 1. But there's limited time that we have to address all of this.
And you're talking just the AP Stylebook, because it's not your only job, right?
Right. And so who does all this deciding? The Stylebook team, in addition to myself, has 6 other members, and all of them, in fact, the rest of them more than myself, have day jobs. So this is working on the Stylebook as part of their already very busy jobs, and those jobs have gotten increasingly busier in the past couple of years with all of the major news that we've been having. So we have, so then how we make decisions, and we also get, questions from others in the AP. Some of the subject matter experts or beat experts will say, hey, I think you should do an entry on this. And I'll say, great. Yeah. How about if you draft it? Yeah. So we have the Stylebook core team, and we meet in varying degrees of frequency throughout the year. This year, it's kind of been on a more ad hoc basis because there's been so much that has bubbled up that we needed to talk about right away. And some of the more, the lesser urgent type things like matters of punctuation and grammar that in other years past, before 2 years ago, might have been higher on the list. They've taken a back seat. Right at this moment, we're increasing the frequency starting tomorrow to meet twice a week by Zoom. We're scattered all over the country. And then in addition to that, we consult with our experts throughout the AP. Depending on the topic, we look to outside experts. We survey the landscape. We watch, might sound a little odd, but we do watch Twitter. I mean, that's the source of great information and directs us to good sources. We consult with outside experts. Sometimes we ask outside people to take a look at a draft. Sometimes the more sensitive or complicated discussions involve senior leadership in AP. For the most part, the bulk of our decisions are the Stylebook teams alone. But for the bigger ones, we have discussions with the senior leaders as well.
Okay. And do you get what about the AP members? Do you get? I imagine when you do make a change, you may hear feedback from members. Do you go to members before the change, or?
Not as much as we used to, because among other things, the members and the customers are swamped too. We did have, up until a couple of years ago, a regular panel with some of our customers that we would turn to, but it was increasingly hard for them to get back to us just because everyone is so busy. And I would have to say, we actually, from our traditional members and customers, we hear less of their own accord, their own initiation than we used to. Certainly we listen and we want it, but that's not nearly as much as it used to be. And I think that's just a function of how busy everyone is.
Okay. Well, we have a question from the room, at least one, I think. If we can take a break and put you on the spot.
We do. Meredith, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Oh, sure. Hi. I was just wondering if the AP is ever going to go beyond having to stick within the confines of wire transfer technology and be able to address more rich text things like M dashes, the mighty M dash, and italics and things like that that wire transfer can't handle.
I have to say, I've never heard the term wire transfer tech.
I just made it up.
Maybe I'll have to add that.
It was always the satellite, right?
Right.
That couldn't transmit.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's the first I've ever gotten it phrased exactly that way. I will say to people will say, should we use italics in this? And I'll say, no, we don't use italics, period. And they don't push back. Now that you raise it, yes, this is definitely putting me on the spot. So this is literally the first time I've ever really contemplated it because, again, it hasn't bubbled to the surface.
Can I jump in, Paula?
Yes, please.
So that this is some of the stuff we used to talk about with why we didn't use accents on names because it would garble when AP transmitted, why we didn't use the % sign or the plus sign because the old way that AP would send our content out wouldn't allow for it. And so, now that we aren't sending AP content to the snow-covered satellite on the roof in Marquette, we can do some of that. So, that's allowed us to do things like start to bring in the % sign and accents in names.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Colleen. Thank you for that. Yeah, and bringing in the accent marks and the other diacriticals was big a couple of years ago, and that came from kind of an outpouring of a public requests at ACES and elsewhere. On the italics question, we haven't gotten an outpouring of requests to do it.
That surprises me.
To do something like that would be a huge change. I mean, do we want to talk about more than and over? I mean, if we changed our style for titles, for instance, from using quotation marks to italics, it would set the world on fire. So I can put that on the list. It's not going to happen this year, but it's a very interesting question.
Yeah. I was wondering if your guidance, I think I may have asked you this, if your guidance on I believe your guidance on using diacritical marks for people is a personal preference thing. If they use it in their name and they ask, then use it, which is common sense. But I do wonder. I wondered immediately about the example of San Jose, California, which likes the accent mark over the E on San Jose. And do you think now that you've made that first step that you'll be we'll see more of that?
Not immediately. That obviously has come up, but a concern of Sally Busby, who was the executive editor at the time that we made this change, and I think it's a valid one, is that we did not want to put our already overburdened reporters in a position of basically opening themselves up to constant accusations of misspelling if they did or didn't use the accent marks in place names, for example, or terms like resume or rose. It was hard enough being accused potentially of misspelling someone's name, although we already were accused by not using the mark. But if you neglect to ask, it's an ongoing burden. I will say that certainly the marks are I see them all the time in AP stories now. I think that's become very widely accepted by our reporters and editors and the sources. But as far as whether it extends to place names and other type words, I can't remember the example, but I saw one recently where maybe it was San Jose, within the jurisdiction itself, sometimes they used it and sometimes they didn't. So how do you settle on it in that case? So I don't know. It's certainly on our list of things to talk about. Probably not this year to talk about, but in the future we will be.
As a copy editor, I've gone to that distinction quite a bit, where if I can find a case where some company doesn't use a certain spelling, like you go down to the legal information at the bottom of the web page, and if it's not done their their silly way, you've got a good argument for saying, okay, we're not we're not going to do it that silly way either. So I also think what comes to mind is Hawaii, and I don't know if there's an official spelling, but you see, I think actually I almost want to look it up. I think the government printing office, publishing office might have gone to the H. I don't even know how to do it, but Hawaii with an accent mark in the middle or with a mark in the middle. Anyway, but good, great question. I mean, I'm a little surprised about the italics because I think maybe because I've been in the broader, world outside of AP, and it's so common that I would think that that's something that people would want to say, oh, let's do the titles in italics. But
well, I mean, we also say, and this is, in any case, people can choose their own house style. So if it works better for you or anyone else to use the italics, then we're not going to take your stylebook subscription away. We do, remember our style is first and foremost for AP staff. I mean, that's how it got its start. It's expanded then very broadly to many, many other types of users. But we also recognize that those many other different types of users have many other different types of needs and audiences. And certainly if anyone wants to say we're going to use italics or, for titles, for instance, or diacriticals for place names, even if that's not our style, as long as they do it consistently and have their own house style, that makes perfect sense for them.
Right. And it's, certainly the expectations are different in different areas. Like in Hawaii, there may be a different, or in San Jose, I don't know what the newspaper style is there, but they may choose to always have that accent mark. So it seems to me that, I mean, AP has gotten a lot thicker, the style book. Now, this is the latest, and it's I mean, a lot of it's separate entries, the food section and large sports section, things like that. I always love to pull out my, well, this is let's see, this is the 6th edition. Norm Goldstein, you mentioned him. This is 1996, so that's not that long ago that it was like this. And then early 70s. This is a fun one just to look through and see what's in here and what's missing. I mean, there's so many silly little things in here that you would think, why did that make the style book and not 10,000 other things? But it seems like, and I'll say, I would say, even since you've been editor, it's the entries are less simply saying, this is the style and here's an example, and more there's more discussion about why that is. Is that true, and is that by design?
Yeah, it's by design. I actually have a term for it that I wouldn't put in the book because it's not a word, and I'd hate to be accused of making up a word, but I call them discussionary approaches, in which we're increasingly viewing what we're doing as an effort to give guidance and things to think about for reporters grappling. God, I just said grappling. Okay, take my style book away from me.
Okay,
but struggling with a variety of complicated issues. So we want to, in some cases, not say, okay, this is right and this is wrong, do this, don't do that, but here are some points to think about. The race-related coverage umbrella entry that covers a lot of areas is an example of that. I don't have it right in front of me right now, but it raises some points. And for example, I think it was 2 years ago, we added a discussion of the terms racist and racism for the first time. And we actually were, I think, in a little ahead of the game, ahead of others, because that was during the time when, for whatever reason, and for many years, journalists, everyone had been reluctant to use the terms racist and racism. Instead, we saw things like racially tinged or racially motivated. And we said, no, let's call it what it is. And there's if it meets the definition of racist or racism, then yes, say it. I mean, but at the same time, we said you need to have discussions with people of a diverse background, and you really need to have these discussions throughout the year. These are such difficult areas and in some ways new to a lot of people that you don't want to be having these discussions on the fly. You should have a conversation throughout the year. And we actually say that in the entry, which certainly was not in that 1970 book that you are looking at. You know, the same with some of the gender related entries, in which I believe we note that language around gender is evolving. And what we say here, what our suggestions are, might not work for your audience, but here are some things to think about. Here's some definitions. So yeah, and that also is much more, I'd say, demanding. It can be very demanding to research hyphen issues, I have to say, but the discussions by our team, and we also draw in many others, not just the 7-member stylebook team, but the AP's race on race-related issues. Obviously, the AP's race and ethnicity team gets involved. We have a group that's a year old, I think, today, called Inclusion Champions, which is dedicated AP staff members throughout the AP who are dedicated to working to ensure that our coverage in all formats is as inclusive as it can be. And they will point out issues with stories, and they'll point out style suggestions. So we go to them, to the Inclusion Champions in their Slack channel to say, hey, what do you think about this? Or they'll come to us with suggestions, which I think, so this is getting off your topic, off your question, but yes, we're, I think.
No, I think it is on topic, yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have tackled a lot more of the big picture issues and gone beyond simple style issues of where to put a comma, for example.
Right. Yeah. And part of that, and I think it's complicated. I think part of that going into those sensitivity type questions and sensitive language questions with broader guidance does make I would think me as a white person feel a little bit inadequate or ill-equipped to do it. It must be when you do this, when you write this out and have this all down, I imagine you feel still a little bit maybe unsure about how it will be received, or do you feel at that point it's been talked about so much that it's...
No, I mean, there's never going to be a point where it's flawless or will be, you know, accepted or embraced by the majority. You know, everyone's going to have concerns. We try and take in and reach out and get as many of those different perspectives as possible, both within the AP and outside the AP. We will spend very long lengths of time on a single sentence or a single word, for example, and go back and forth for ever, it seems like, on a paragraph or an entry, and it gets vetted and revetted and changed and redrafted. And you know, right now we're in the midst of, I don't want to give away the store on some of our upcoming updates, but we're on.
Please do.
No, I said AP likes to break news, but not in a style chat. But you know, and again, we've been working on a major update on a topic that the people involved in updating it are fully involved in coverage on a daily basis themselves. So, you know, carving out time is difficult, but I thought we were almost through like 90% of it before it moves on to the next level of review. And so I had a Zoom call the other day and I said, okay, you know, with 4 or 5 people, and I said, I think this should take 15 minutes to talk about these last couple of points. And it's an hour and 5 minutes later, you know, with still more changes to be dealt with. So, that said, you know, sometimes despite all of that, we will put out some guidance, even on a small matter, let alone the bigger ones, and we'll tweet it out, for example, and we'll get immediate and often very constructive feedback, often not so constructive. But someone will make a point and we'll say, oh my God, after all of this time that we have spent talking about this with so many people, this never came up. And yes, let's take that in and let's make a change accordingly going forward.
And you do respond to that. I mean, I know there are decisions that have been made in the past that were met with outrage or pushback. You know, anyway, I'm sure much of it constructive, and you've said, you know what, yeah, after thinking about it, we'll go back on our guidance on that. So,
well, I took a different approach, especially because, you know, we started with the every 2 years print publication schedule, and I knew also that this area, the area of disabilities coverage, there would be an opportunity to get a lot of feedback from the public from outside the AP. So last year, I I said, okay, we're starting work on expanding and changing our guidance on disabilities, both overall and on individual disabilities. And I said to the public, we'd love your feedback. And we've got some of the entries and some of the initial guidance done, which included some discussion of person first versus disability first, and got it out there, and indeed got a lot of feedback, which will indeed cause us to change some of the what was at that time preliminary. You know, I think this got lost in that discussion, and I can understand how it happened. But we said at the time, this is just basically a draft. I was inviting the public to take part in being a very big part of the stylebook team's work. For that reason. But that also is an area where people have very strong opinions, even within the same community, which is a term that I hate, often have very, very strong opinions on how that language should be used. And that's, right. So we need to take all of that into account. And then going forward, we'll be, you know, soon working on taking that, taking those changes and then continuing to work on the rest of the disabilities guidance that I said from the outset, you know, we're in the middle of and help us out here.
Yeah. Let me get back to that, the Inclusion Champions team, which is another great name. You guys are good at coming up with great names. Where did the idea for that come about, and how did you decide who should be included in Inclusion Champions?
Well, I'm not. It was not my. I am an inclusion champion, but it was done by people other than myself. I believe Amanda Barrett, who's now one of our vice presidents, I believe, and Michael Giarusso, who is our sports editor, among other things. Are the leaders of it. Where the idea really came from, I don't know. But the AP in the past couple of years has been making a big push for more inclusive storytelling in general, and we have a lot of internal resources. There's been some memos and some guidance, and you know how that goes with memos and guidance. And so I believe probably Amanda and Michael put their heads together and said, let's come up with these inclusion champions, who are a group of staffers, not some are managers, but also just regular AP staffers around the world in a variety of departments. I think probably some people were nominated and then others asked to be included in that group. They have a Slack channel, and as I said, I think they, among other things, they will point out issues with stories, and they have had many instances of, you know, people don't create issues and do things we wish they hadn't in stories, you know, on purpose. Right. But sometimes it doesn't, and the rush of things get caught, and it takes an inclusion champion who is looking specifically for these kinds of areas to say, wait, that lead is off, or there's an issue here. And they're doing a newsletter. And this is, again, is in all formats too, photos and video as well as words. And they're invaluable for the style team. They're not style team members per se, but they're a very valuable resource to us, that they will come to us independently, or I will go to them and say, hey, what about this?
Okay. And is this something that happens, this sensitivity reading, in effect? Is it something that happens after the fact, that a story is published and then they go back or is there an opportunity to sort of run things by them beforehand?
It's both. Yeah, it's both. And reporters often will know of a colleague working on such and such story, and they'll say, hey, be sure to consider this, or, you know, reach out to more diverse sources, or look at that photo. Does that really represent the community that you're writing about? You know, again, in an ideal world, it could all be done pre-publication, you know, and these problems would be solved before they ever exist. And some of that does happen. Other times it's after the fact, and someone will look at the story or the photo or the video and say, you know, there's an issue here. Can we talk about this? And then we hope get it fixed, if that's, you know, if it determines that it needs to be fixed.
Yeah, sometimes the issue isn't obvious, or you don't expect to see the issue, and then and as you said, people aren't intending necessarily to create an issue, but maybe lack of awareness, they say something that really doesn't come across correctly.
Right.
So you talked about the internal decisions and the decisions that maybe don't necessarily happen at the style book, and you mentioned one of those was the black and white decision. The AP style book, AP style on was to capitalize black, which was probably not something that I assumed it wasn't a long discussion, because it was fairly quick that when the George Floyd protests came up, that a lot of publications sort of took a new look at that and said, why are we lowercasing, and there's a great traditions and history here that that term should be uppercase. Was that is that true? Was it a quick discussion in house, or how did that come about?
We'd had some discussion about proposals or requests to capitalize Black for several years, not, maybe 5 on and off before we did it. But it was, I would see references to it in some of what I was reading, and I would take it to some members of the team. But up until even the year before George Floyd, and certainly 2 years ago, I talked with Black staffers within the AP, and to a person, they saw no need to capitalize it. And we weren't seeing a lot of groundswell elsewhere. It seemed largely confined to the Black press and some columnists. NABJ, National Association of Black Journalists, was keeping it lowercase, and that was key to me. So I didn't feel that I should be pushing it forward to capitalize it if NABJ wasn't, and if our own Black staffers were saying no, there's no reason to do it. But it was on our radar, and I'd bring it up every year, and I'd check back with some of our staff, and they saw no reason to do it, so we didn't. And then everything changed and escalated in the aftermath of George Floyd, and as you noted, the whole conversation changed. And at that point, I think literally the day after, I said, "Hey, time to talk about this again." And I gathered all of the arguments that I had already actually had in various files, and then some new ones, got the team together, got the race and ethnicity folks together, eventually senior leadership in the AP, and everyone, for something that complex, yes, that decision did come to capitalize Black, did come pretty quickly. But that said, there were 2 or 3 lengthy meetings with senior leadership in AP as we talked through all the arguments, and I laid out the arguments for. And again, it still wasn't universal. Within the AP, some of our Black staffers said, no, there's no reason for it.
Right. Sure.
So I think there's this view that it's supported 100% by just about everyone, and in fact, there's some that either some African American people who either don't support it or see no reason for it. So.
Right. Yeah. I've read online all the discussions and the arguments, and there are some very compelling arguments for either way. And then the decision on white, it was interesting because I think we were waiting for the decision from AP, and AP made the decision on Black, but delayed the decision on white and said, "We're going to think about that some more and get back to you." Right?
Yeah, we had wanted, ideally, my goal had been to decide and announce them at the same time, but that it became pretty apparent that white was much more fraught, with much less consensus than the decision on Black was, and we didn't want to hold up the decision on Black, so we went ahead with that. Well, we continued to talk to more people and do more research on white, and that included talking at length with a number of AP staffers around the globe. You have to remember, AP is a global news organization. So again, our style is first and foremost for our own staff. Right. And we have AP journalists at heart. And really, there's understanding and agreement of what white means across the globe is widely varying. And we got widely differing viewpoints from staffers of all backgrounds, Black, white, brown, even though we don't use that term, about whether it should or shouldn't be capitalized, and some really, really compelling, just very persuasive arguments on both sides of it. That one was really, really hard. And either way, whichever way you go, there are many, many issues with it. Ultimately, senior leadership made the decision to keep it lowercase. There's been unhappiness with that. There would be unhappiness with capitalized white. It's very, very difficult.
Some things you think I think you think there ought to be an easy answer, and some things like that. I mean, I consider that personally, as an editor, quite a bit, and really, either way is problematic. Capitalizing white, there are some really compelling arguments for keeping it lowercase, and some really compelling arguments for uppercasing it. So, and I think, I wrote about it and basically said, I'm glad it's not my decision, because I don't know, I really don't know how I would come down. But then, of course, as you say, that, it's a decision that locally, you have to make for your own staff, whatever AP decides. You have to look at your local community and see what is comfortable for you in that situation. So weighty issues, and I do want to talk a little bit more about this bike riding thing, because I think we skipped through cycling. You won a medal. I didn't even ask you what it was for exactly. Oh, look at that. So what can you tell us? You don't need to tell the world, but we're a small group. We won't tell other people. So what are you working on? What is coming up? Are we going to have a lot of, because it's been 2 years since the last book, are we going to see a lot of significant movement? Are there some areas that you're looking at that that you haven't looked at before that would be new entries?
Well, I'm going to have to go back to my list. My mind has gone blank, believe it or not. Colleen, I just told you all of them. You might have to remind me. Not that I did prep Colleen a couple days ago that we would have, I think, a fewer of the individual kind of lower level, unless you get into more than over, that I think the folks at the time thought was lower level, and that became the most divisive issue of our time. Yeah. But some of those kind of more grammatical word nerdy, the grammatical word nerdy type entries probably less than we've had in the past. And again, they're on my priority list. They just keep getting bumped down because we're spending so much time on these weightier issues. Disabilities, as I said, we've been working on and are continuing to work on. I guess it wouldn't be a big surprise to say that we're updating and greatly expanding our immigration guidance. That one is, we have some fairly common standards, exhaustive or extensive immigration guidance right now. There will be more. I don't know when that'll come, but that's been a big focus. Certainly more on the coronavirus. Where's my list, Colleen? What am I forgetting?
Well, it depends on how much you're willing to have Aaron tweet out today.
Yeah. There's a whole list of fairly meaty things that I don't necessarily want to talk about right now, honestly.
Yeah, sure.
But our yes, we're getting, I think, more discussionary. I mean, we'll have more on gender and sexuality. We've been developing that for the past several years. We'll do more on that. We'll do more. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I did want to ask you about this, about the Epicene Day. I think that's something that the guidance is still basically right around it. People are unfamiliar with it. So right around it if you can. But of course, if it's somebody's personal preference, then I can't remember. I wish I could remember off the top of my head. What is the guidance on personal preference when it comes to singular they or pronouns?
Without having it immediately in front of me, it's yes, certainly if a person prefers singular they, that we use it. But yes, our bigger recommendation is that you write around it, rephrase when possible, because in fact, like it or not, it still is confusing to many readers out there in the land. We think it's not confusing because I think people in our circle use it a lot and are familiar with it and conversant in it. A lot of readers and a lot of our customers' areas still are confused by it. And one of our guiding principles is to be able to write stories and have language in a way that does not turn readers off to the degree that your bigger points get lost. We don't want a reader to get tripped up in the third paragraph by saying Mark is getting their code, and say what is going on here and just stop reading. That defeats the purpose of whatever the story is about. At the same time, we're on board with calling people what they want to be called, although that very statement is fraught because I could want to be called a lot of things and AP is not going to call me that.
Right.
So, it sounds good to say, yes, we'll call people what they want to be called. But when you dive into that at all, it becomes extremely complex and not nearly as simple as it sounds. So it is on our list to take another look at whether to expand our guidance on they or some people say, well, we should use they for a company, for example. The company released their earnings today, or for a band. Saying it dehumanizes a band to call it an it rather than a they, and common usage certainly, applies they to companies and bands all the time. So
True.
but that's
True.
something that we will look at. Haven't gotten to that point yet, but it's on the list.
Yeah, that would be an interesting change. You would get some pushback on that, I'm sure. But there's something to be said for it. So what was that you got a gold medal? How is this a distance thing, or is this a sprinting thing, or what kind of bike riding are we doing here?
Track cycling is weird. It's not for the most part simply start to finish, and so
Okay.
it was in the match sprint, which is this particular race is kind of a combination of a cat and mouse game with a single other competitor for the first section, and then one of you takes off and you race like hell to the end, and you may or may not outlast your competitor, and you go through several rounds of that. And there's strategy, so there's speed but also strategy involved.
Okay.
As opposed to something like a time trial where the 500-meter time trial where the gun goes off and you go around the track 2.5 times and hope for a good time. Match sprints has a lot of tactics to it.
Okay, I'm gonna have to Google this because what you said sounded fascinating, but I'm really lost. I can't.
Someday I'll come up with a style book ready version to trying to explain.
There you go. So what? How did you get started doing? Have you always been a bike rider? Or is this something you came to later in life?
Later. Well, the fascinating thing about it is I said, Masters has age groups. So my age group is 60 to 64, and there were, Masters racers who were 35, 40, and some who were 75, 80, and we all got to compete in our own smaller age categories. So I did come to it, quote, late in life. I started bike riding in 2000.
You didn't say late in life, later in life.
Later in life, late in life, right? I mean,
okay.
I used to be a runner on and off for a very long time, and then I switched to cycling, and then I was on a race team for a while in Seattle, and they did a try the track program. Track cycling is very niche. For one thing, you need to have a track nearby, and I think there's only 18 or so in the country. But you get to go fast. You don't have to climb hills. And it's thrilling. We have one of my training partners right now used to be nearly an Olympian, not quite, but almost an Olympian skeleton competitor. And she switched from that to track cycling because it gives her the same kind of thrill. So it's almost as fun as dealing with hyphens and commas.
I'm convinced, and I'll definitely be Googling and looking it up, and maybe I'll Google track cycling and Paula Froke, and I'll get all the details.
No, it won't be out. The 60 to 64 category was, not one of the premier ones, but you take what you can get.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that aspect of it, and we're looking forward to seeing some of the more details about what's coming up in the book. I'm planning in the spring you'll have a new book in May, same as. We
will. We probably will release the immigration update will come out before the print book because you can't hold on to it. We need to go ahead and push some things out. I still, for the life of me, cannot believe I've forgotten the list of 6 major topics we're dealing with. But
you're probably just using that as an excuse. So
I wouldn't tell you anyway.
Yeah.
So we'll have some updates, substantive updates before the book, just pushed out online, and then others will, say for the big reveal when the print book comes out.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've sort of lost track of time, and Heather just reminded me of the time, and we're at an hour. So thank you so much for being here. It's been very interesting to hear some of the details about how things are made. I consider myself fairly knowledgeable about the AP style book. I wasn't aware of all the sort of those process things, and that's interesting. It's interesting to talk about some of the struggles and challenges with finding the right language that will be useful to a very broad number of customers and people who use the book in various industries. So we're not going to have a show in 2 weeks for Thanksgiving, but we'll be back in December. appreciate you all being here. Thank you, Colleen, for being here and piping in, and good to see you all again. So take care. We'll see you in next month.
Thank you, Mark.